Hello all. In my previous videos, I've compared the Crystal Super Micro-OLED and the ultra-wide in DCS, both of which I've now used extensively online in Project Overlord, a World War II online combat server. But more recently, I've made the move from the Crystal Super OLED to the Dream Air, and I'd like to share my experience and some of my findings with the Dream Air's much discussed facial interface. It's worth saying straight away that I still think the Crystal Super OLED is a fantastic headset. The Dream Air hasn't suddenly given me substantially better visuals. For me, it's been about taking that fantastic micro OLED visual experience and putting it into a completely different and smaller form factor, and I'll come back to that later. One of the things that pushed me towards getting the Dream Air was getting the Lighthouse faceplate for the Crystal Super. I'd previously used Lighthouse tracking on the original Crystal, and going back to it reminded me how much I liked it. The slam tracking on the Super is really good, but previously I've had to put QR code style markers around the room, and we've just decorated the room and I've had to remove them, and I've been losing my tracking a little bit when using my DOF Reality H3 motion simulator. And with that I use motion compensation, and that's really important for me online when I'm dogfighting, because I'm moving my head around quickly, looking over my shoulder to check six, and the last thing I want in the middle of a dogfight is for the tracking to lose its position. With the Lighthouse faceplate, when I put that on the Super, everything felt just completely locked down again. So when I decided to move to the Dream Air, I specifically went for the Lighthouse version, and I purchased my headset through Scan here in the UK. Obviously, the first thing you notice with the Dream Air when you take it out the box is the size. Everybody says it, but it was really surprisingly small. Initially, it almost felt a little flimsy to me, but I think that's because I've become accustomed to picking up headsets like the Crystal Super. And whilst they're not 8KX levels of bulkiness, they're still fairly substantial things. You pick a Super up and you know you've picked up a VR headset, but the Dream Air is completely different. And once it's on your face, that becomes one of its biggest advantages, with it being so small and so light. I already noticed a big improvement moving from the ultra-wide module to the OLED, because the OLED optical engine on the Super is noticeably lighter, but the Dream Air takes that to a different level. And it's important for the way I use DCS. I don't use NeckSafer, and if I want to check my six, I'm physically moving around and looking behind me in my chair, which I'm strapped into as well, so having that flexibility and moving my neck is really important to me. With the Crystal Super, particularly during a dogfight, you can still feel the mass and the rotational inertia of the headset as you're moving your head around. Now, I completely got used to it, but you still know it's there. When I put the Dream Air on and use that, that changes. So the first time I climbed into the Spitfire and looked behind me, I immediately noticed that I could move my head around more naturally. The headset also wasn't catching the back of my simulator seat in the same way, but more importantly, there was just substantially less mass hanging off the front of my face. When you're moving your head around quickly during a dogfight, that's made a bigger difference than what I expected. Now, comfort is also one of the biggest concerns when I bought the Dream Air, because I've heard about the reports of people struggling with the facial interfaces. And I've got an incredibly sensitive, or perhaps weirdly shaped face when it comes to VR. Solutions that work brilliantly for FOV and comfort for other people don't necessarily work for me. So of course, a lot of people have struggled with this standard facial interface. I actually found this was relatively comfortable. I could fly for maybe 2 hours with it. Getting low FOV with this, and I'll show some screenshots of me trying that out shortly. So what I did is I printed the Z Flyboy facial interface, and still need to fit this. But to fit this, I could not for the life of me find anywhere that sold these micro Velcro adhesive strips. So I ordered the Dream Air Modders kit from Studio Form. That's just come today. It's got the small Velcro strips, but then it's also got these custom fitted strips that will go nicely onto that interface. But until I've found out which thickness of these I'd like, I'm not gonna kind of make the fixing permanent. The only thing I need to do on this is switch over the 4 screws on the top, the 4 screws on the bottom as well, get them onto my Z Flyboy facial interface, and then ultimately decide whether it's 3mm, 8mm or 12mm that I want to put on. I've got like the leather type interface, which I've always used on my OG Crystal, and I always found that was the best. On the Super, I did like the feeling of this kind of fabric one, but what I found on the Super is this compressed too much, got my eyes too close to the lenses, and my eyes actually hit the round edge of the OLED lens cover, and it made it uncomfortable for long sorties, so I didn't like that. So I actually went back to the standard Pimax interface again for the Crystal Super. So I'm intrigued to see how the Z Flyboy one performs. I've got max FOV on this because I've not been getting a massive amount of FOV with the standard interface, which I'm not going to anyway with the Dream Air, but I've only been getting just over 90 degrees horizontal FOV. I'll come on to some more tests shortly on what I found between the two different face masks. So in test HMD using the standard facial interface, I'm just going to focus on horizontal FOV here because that's what I tend to notice out of my peripheral vision. Again, this doesn't feel bad. It does feel like I've got a bit more pressure on my forehead than what I would have in the Super, but I can use it for a fair while. 94 for me on the standard, which I feel is a little low, and that's really straining to see the edges. If I go back, it's probably 92 to 94, so let's see what the Z Flyboy Max FOV facial interface does for us. Right, so back in test HMD, this is with the Z Flyboy Max FOV facial interface, and I'm using the 8mm Studio Form fabric interface on this. I tried using the 3mm one, and it felt like I had nothing pressing onto my face. My face was just pressing into the lenses. So I've put this one on the 8mm one, and to be frank, I wouldn't be able to use this because I can feel the lenses pressing against my eyes. But let's have a look what FOV I do get. So I'm probably saying I'm getting about 98, and I have a bit of a weird shaped nose. I cannot get that any closer to my face. So I think I'd say 98 on a good day. If I absolutely put it central, I'd probably get about 100 FOV from that. So what I'll do now is I'll put the 12mm thickness pad on there to see if I can use this max FOV facial interface mask. And then if it ends up being that I cannot use the max thickness and still be comfortable, what I can do is just use the Studio Form spacer kit just to add a few on. Hopefully I won't lose much FOV, because ultimately what I don't want to do is be putting all this on, spacing it out to the point where I might as well just keep the standard facial mask, unless this setup with the Studio Form interface is more comfortable than the standard one. Okay, so now with the 12mm fabric interface on, instantly it's more comfortable. It's just holding those lenses kind of off my eye socket, which I guess is where you want to be. You want to be as close as you can without touching to get the most FOV you can out of the lenses. So let's just test the horizontal again. I can see both just about there at 96. So I'm probably losing about 2 degree FOV, but it is more than what I got with the OEM facial interface, which is good for me. And it does feel a little bit more comfy. So we'll have to see as I do some longer sorties, but I think I will be sticking with the fabric one, unless the leather thicker one or the PU style feels better. So let me try that out now. Okay, so this is the like fake leather type one. Doesn't feel quite as comfortable as the 12mm on the fabric one. I'm not sure why. I think it's because I can feel just the 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock of the lenses just pressing slightly on the underside of my eye sockets. It might be fit to fit variation in terms of how I put the headset on, but it does feel a little bit closer. Yeah, around 96 to 100. You know, it depends how much you press it onto your face. But do I think I'd stay with this one? I think I'd probably go to the fabric one, to be fair. But I think the fabric one did feel a bit more comfortable, which is consistent with some of the feedback from the guys on Discord. I think it is an improvement over standard. I'm going to stick to this one versus the standard facial interface. And then I guess just thank you Z Flyboy for doing this modification and making it available to public. Top work. So even though I did find the original interface fairly comfortable, if I look dead ahead in the Spitfire, of the 2 bolts that are kind of connecting the gun sight mount to the inside of the canopy, I can only just see the first 2 bolts. If I look down at my spade grip where it is now, I can only just see underneath the spade grip. Now, if I then go to the Z Flyboy Max FOV interface, it's a lot different. So let me just change it over. Okay, so with the Z Flyboy one, it's almost like my vision has just opened up. So I can see not only those two bolts, but I can see the bracket and beyond them. And then I can't only see the bottom of my spade grip, but I can now see the pneumatic lines that are going up to the brake and also the gun button. So that is remarkably different. So even though I'm only getting those couple of degrees extra FOV horizontal, albeit I seem to be getting more vertical as well, which is what you'd expect, by moving my eyes closer to the lenses, I'm getting a lot more FOV, or a lot more opened up visual kind of representation of the cockpit, and that's really cool for me. So even though I really enjoyed the original, you know, Dream Air experience with how light it is on my face, this Z Flyboy Max FOV facial interface has certainly opened it up more. Another immediate benefit for me was my headphones. I use bare dynamic as in the simulator rather than the integrated audio, so I can hear everything that's going off around the aircraft, around the systems and around the audio. With the Crystal Super, I had to tilt these headphones backwards to get them to fit into the frame of the headset. But with the Dream Air, I can just put them on normally over the top of my headset. And that's quite important for me because it also mimics what I'm using during my PPL lessons in real life. And now where I'm practicing on X-Plane or practicing in Flight Simulator or practicing in DCS or flying in DCS, it feels incredibly natural. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to achieve. Now, in terms of visuals, there isn't some enormous revelation. I've been using the Crystal Super Micro-OLED for months, and the image is fantastic. The blacks, colours, clarity is superb. And the Dream Air gives me essentially that same type of micro-OLED experience, but just in that smaller package. So you don't put the Dream Air on and suddenly think the Crystal Super OLED looks outdated, because it doesn't. There are some slight differences though on my particular headset. I'm seeing some more brown tinting towards the edge of the lenses on my Dream Air. I'd already had two different Super OLED modules because I was having issues with the FOV. I can never get the prescribed FOV. But I also am able to see quite a bit of glare, which I know is a function of the OLED lenses. But yeah, I certainly see some glare. I wouldn't automatically conclude that every Dream Air is going to look like mine, as there does seem to be some batch-to-batch variation. The eye tracking worked straight away, calibrated it, Pimax Play picked up the headset, and I've had no real problems. And this brings me to probably the biggest thing I've noticed about the Dream Air. So I'm a runner as well, and I've ran ultramarathons in the past, and I still do a long run each weekend. And I seem to go through running shoes nearly as quickly as I do through VR equipment, which my wife would probably argue is quite an achievement. But when you find a really good pair of running shoes, you stop noticing them. They disappear on your feet, and that's probably the best way I can describe the Dream Air. Once I got the fit right for my face, it just disappeared. Checking the 6 feels more natural. Rapidly moving my head around feels more natural. There's less inertia. I'm not hitting the seat. I've also noticed it in X-Plane and Flight Simulator. So I practice my crosswind landings a lot in X-Plane, procedures, VFR flying in Flight Simulator. And I want to concentrate on replicating my real life flying in the simulator, as opposed to knowing that I've got a VR headset on my face. And with the Super OLED, it was comfortable, but the mass was always there. The Dream Air largely removes that. So that was a big positive for me, especially with using it as a supplementary part of my PPL training, and I will share another video on that soon. So is it better than the Crystal Super? For me, yes. And I'm very pleased that I've made the transition. But I'm not saying that the Super OLED is a bad headset, because it's not. It's a fantastic headset. If you've got one, I'm not saying you should sell it and buy a Dream Air. It hasn't suddenly given some enormous improvement in image quality. The OLED still had those fantastic visuals. But what the Dream Air does do is package the same sort of visual experience into a completely different form factor. And once you get that form factor set up properly for your individual face shape, the right facial interface, the right position, the right fit, it just disappears. And that's the difference for me. I'm not thinking about the headset anymore. I'm just in the aircraft. And because I'm incredibly picky about the immersion, that's a big deal for me. So if you're just looking for a fantastic high resolution micro OLED headset for simulation, the Super OLED already does that extremely well. But if you're chasing those final details of immersion, and particularly if you're doing something physical like World War II combat, where you're constantly looking around and checking six, then I think the Dream Air is a better solution. Not because it changes what I'm seeing, because it changes how much I notice the thing that's allowing me to see it. And that is the biggest compliment I can give it. Now I've got some more videos coming all around this. I'm going to compare X-Plane and Microsoft Flight Simulator specifically from the perspective of using them alongside my real world PPL training. And I've also got another Spitfire comparison video, so keep an eye out for those. And as always, I genuinely make this content just to share my experiences, and if you found it useful, then please do like and subscribe. And particularly if you've got a Dream Air or Crystal Super and you've experimented with some of these different facial interfaces, I'd be really interested to hear what FOV you're getting and what experience has been for you particularly, and please add them in the comments. So thanks for watching, have a great day, and I'll see you in the skies.